Doctors of Reddit, what is your how the hell are you even alive right now? Story? When I was in trauma surgery in upstate by, got a notification about a man who was shot 3 times in the head. He comes in, literally one eye hanging out of the socket, blood everywhere, and he slumped forward. Apparently he was shot in the temple, exited out his right eye socket, in the nose exited from the roof of the mouth, and in the cheek one with exit from the side of the head. At this point I'm thinking they just brought him in, so we can pronounce him in the air, because he looked dead. I go to examine him, and tilt his head back, and he says you be gentle. I jump back, and scream like a little boy, as did everyone in the room. Literally the bullets missed his brain in every single shot. Paramedic here. I ran a call on a guy that was ejected out of a late 80s Mustang. The guy said the car rolled 2 times before pitching him out of the driver's side window. He said he landed on his head and the 7-inch scalp avulsion seemed to corroborate his story. The car was completely crushed and sitting on its top. The guy wanted to refuse treatment and transport. GCS 15 and never lost consciousness. I insisted though that he be seen at the ER. He rode the whole way texting people. When I told him that he shouldn't be alive he said yeah I got a hard nugget. We have a patient we see at our hospital monthly. Young guy, early 20s, absolute turd to take care of. He has diabetes and essentially refuses to take his insulin. He comes in every time with diabetic ketoacidosis, which is essentially your body going into a coma-like state due to your blood pH becoming acidotic and very elevated sugars. The impressive part isn't that he survives this, most people do. It's that this is a recurring event every month and each time someone manages to find him / get him to the hospital. If he was ever alone when this occurred and no one found him in a timely fashion, he'd be toast. Been seeing him regularly at the hospital for the last 18 months I've been here. My friend's father is an orthopedic surgeon, and he told us a story that once a boyfriend and girlfriend came in because they tried an in-home abortion by running her pelvis over with a car. Abortion worked, but I hope they actually never reproduce. I did a medical rotation where my consultant was an endocrinologist. We had a young man with type 1 diabetes who would present almost weekly in diabetic ketoacidosis DKA, actually a medical emergency as can cause coma and death from not taking his insulin and just eating whatever he wanted. Always self-discharged once he felt better. In my last week of the rotation, he came in after overdosing on 4th opioids, found by his family after no one having any contact for about 24 hours. His temperature was 24 degrees Celsius in the ambulance and the pH of his blood was 6. 76, 7. 35 to 7. 45 is normal, less than about 6. 8 is not generally compatible with life. The paramedics who all knew him genuinely thought this was it for him, as did all the ICU. But as the old saying goes, you're not dead until you're warm and dead, in that at cold temperatures, your metabolic rate can be slowed to the point where it appears you're deceased. However, on warming, your body resumes more normal metabolic function. Warmed him up in the ICU, treated his DKA and he survived. I rotated away to another hospital before he was discharged, but he was out of ICU when I left, awake and interactive. Edit, to Clarefy, 24 degrees Celsius normal is 36-37. 5. Not a doc, but I'm a paramedic. I had a patient shot 6 times in the chest with a 9mm at point blank range. Homie was still yelling at the other dude now in custody how he was gonna get out to the hospital and find him. I was pretty dumbfounded at how lucky this bastard was considering most people don't yell after 6 shots in the chest. Since you didn't specify how long they stayed alive. In med school I had a patient who got shot in the head a couple blocks away from the hospital. He was still able to talk for a few minutes after arrival, but it was clearly not a survivable injury. I stayed with him as his brain started to swell. I remember the moment his eyes became dull and his speech slurred to a stop. My first day as an EMT I had 6 calls. The 5th was a really old woman who had knocked on her head by falling in the bathroom. When we arrived, she was able to respond to us. Her sister handed me a stuffed wolf and said make sure she gets this. When we dropped her off at the hospital they had to immediately call the stroke team. I watched her die, and I never got a chance to give her the wolf. Working as an EMT, we were called to a pensioner's home where an old woman had gotten drunk and slipped in the bathroom. When we got there, she was in a good mood and cooperative, so we went about treating her casually. I eventually went to check the bathroom to see how she had fallen, and the entire floor was covered in blood. There was so much blood that it started to coagulate into these bowl-shaped masses. She had completely destroyed the toilet bowl with her head, and there were shards of porcelain sticking out of the ground. Considering she had alcohol in her system and took blood thinning medication, we took her to the hospital as quickly as possible. In the ambulance, she went from laughing at random shit to just staring blankly in front of her. Thought she was going to die any second. Not sure what happened to her. I had this patient before medical school when I was an EMT, and he still sticks with me. 20-something-year-old male, motorcycle vs SUV 1. We arrived on scene to a man face down in a pool of blood, 1L. We were told he was wearing a helmet, but it was nowhere to be found. He was about 30 feet from his bike and there was a clear trail of blood to the bike because he wasn't wearing leathers. We rolled him onto the board and that was the first beating heart I ever saw. His road rash was so bad it eroded his chest wall, and we were staring at his heart, a collapsed lung, his great vessels, and the branches of the brachial plexus. Amazingly, they were all intact. Of course, he had multiple injuries to his other extremities, mandible, zygomatic arches, etc. But we frankly didn't care at the time. We were on scene for no more than 2 minutes before we sped off to the trauma center. I remember transferring the patient to the chief of trauma surgery, whose first words when the trauma pad was removed were "Holy ST." I thought for sure he died. Fast forward 2 years, when I was at my primary care physician's office for a checkup after my medical school interview, and saw a collection bin for a veteran's wedding. Guess who? Yup, it was him. They had taken his left arm to reconstruct his chest, since the nerves were shot, and he recovered. I saw a guy who got shot 9 times, 3 of which were in the neck. Nothing important got hit, so we just cleaned out the wounds, packed and covered them, and that was it. How does someone get shot 3 times in the neck without sustaining any damage to anything important? Aren't a lot of important things clustered together in the neck? There was a guy who OD'd, was found by his roommate unconscious, had to be resuscitated, was barely responsive to painful stimuli, blood pH was 6. Now normal blood pH is between 7.35 to 7.5, and remember pH is a logarithmic scale, typically 6.8 is not considered compatible with life. He ended up waking up and following commands for a bit. Just crazy. Following commands for a bit. Then what? Did he survive or eventually die from it? Not a doctor, but my sister's cardiologist has this story now. My family has had trouble holding on to health insurance for many years, but my sister's yearly heart checkups have been a priority. She was born with Ebstein's anomaly of the tricuspid valve, which basically means blood leaks backwards and pumps oxygen very inefficiently. 1 year her appointment got postponed a few months due to a switch in providers and all that stupid shit. My sister was in 10th grade gym class and having trouble running every day. That's what she told us. I feel kinda sick after class, which we thought would mean she got lightheaded. Turns out she was puking every class due to the exertion. My parents immediately decided that checking up on her heart would be the best decision, and thank God they did. Her cardiologist said her heart was the size of a small watermelon, and it was an absolute wonder she was only puking and not passing out or literally dropping dead. If she was running a mile in less than 30 minutes, and I think her mile was under 15. He said it was one of the most advanced states of Ebstein's he'd seen, if not the worst currently unoperated case in the country US. Basically, she had to have an emergency open heart surgery cone procedure and bidirectional Glenn at Boston Children's, and now, 4 years later, she's still on medication and is looking to get a Passamaker. Unbelievably, the Asholgem teacher still gave her a B final grade. Anesthesiologist here. I once had a 20-something-year-old Jehovah's Witness as a patient who kept bleeding and bleeding after childbirth. Because of her religion, she refused blood transfusions. After other measures failed, we finally took her to the operating room for an emergency hysterectomy that saved her life. In a pregnant woman, the normal hemoglobin, the protein in your blood that carries oxygen, count is between 9.5 to 15 g/dl. When we took her to the OR, her hemoglobin was 3.1 g/dl. In the ICU after, it was down to 2.6 g/dl. I remember talking to her before going to the OR, and all she could do was lie flat in bed. If she did so much as lift her head, her heart rate would jump from about 130 to 180, and she started having chest pain. I also had to tell her A, that I didn't know if she would live through the surgery, and B, that I wasn't sure how much of an anesthetic I would be able to give her, so there was the possibility she might remember some of the procedure. Fortunately, she did survive and didn't have any recall. If she wasn't otherwise young and healthy, I'm sure she would have died. Edited a couple times for clarity.
N.
I had my period for over a month, and when I had blood work done for a routine checkup, my hemoglobin was at a 4.6. They sent me to the and when they retested me, I was at a 3.2. The doctors kept telling me it was amazing that I was walking around. I had to have 2 iron transfusions and 3 blood transfusions. I didn't even realize anything was wrong